Names are more than just labels that we slap on our characters, and today I want to talk about how you can use character names to bring flavor and meaning to your stories. What's up, guys? My name's Brandon McNulty. I'm a writer, I'm the author of Bad Parts, and welcome to my writing channel. Today I want to talk about one of the more fun parts of the writing process, coming up with character names. This is something that I always have a blast with, and I know a lot of other writers do. But today I want to give you 4 tips that'll help make the process more efficient for you. So my first tip is to always consider your setting when you're coming up with character names. And this is so important. Now, if you're writing a fantasy novel that's set in a total fantasy world, you can get away with pretty much any name you want, whether it's totally made up, or it's based on a real name, or it's a variation of a real name, or it has 3 hyphens in it, or it's spelled backwards, or whatever. You can get away with pretty much anything that works. But if you're writing a story that takes place on planet Earth, you have to adhere to some rules. For instance, you have to worry about when your story takes place, because characters who exist in the 1800s are going to have different names than characters who exist right now. And you also have to worry about where your story takes place, because characters who live in America are going to have different names than characters who live in Japan. It's just the basics. I mean, you know this. It's just something you have to consider before you start naming your characters. You always need to think about the setting and what kind of culture they live in and where people come from and when people come from. My number 2 tip is to try and come up with names that paint an image of who your characters are. One of the best ways that I can illustrate this is by giving you 2 popular character names. First one is Walter White, and the second one is Cosmo Kramer. Notice the difference between these two? Even if you have never seen Breaking Bad, you get the sense that Walter White is a character, based on his name, is a character who is severe and serious and takes himself seriously. But on the other hand, if you have Cosmo Kramer from Seinfeld, you get the impression that he's someone who's lackadaisical and free-spirited. And that's one of the powers of naming your characters. If you give them names that suggest a certain personality, you can clue your readers in on how they should be interpreting these characters even before they get to know them. In general, you want to give your characters names that fit their personalities. For instance, if you have a woman who is serious and severe, don't give her a name like Trixie. That's just going to screw up the reader's image of her. Instead, pick something more appropriate like Elizabeth or Victoria. Now, if you do have a character who's more lighthearted, maybe they don't want to be called Elizabeth or Victoria. So instead, tweak it a little bit. Give us Lizzie or Liz or Vicky or Vic. Something else that works. Don't be afraid to use nicknames. And don't be afraid to use wild and crazy nicknames either. For instance, in my book Bad Parts, one of the main characters is named Cheeto, and he's this wild, free-spirited guy. He's got long orange hair and he sings in a rock band. So I came up with that name Cheeto early on in the drafting process. It stuck and I rolled with it, and people who read the book, they always remember Cheeto because the name is so distinct. So don't be afraid to try out different nicknames if it is an appropriate fit for the character. My number 3 tip, remember that your character can be referred to by several different names. And this is a great way to illustrate the relationships in your story. For instance, I'm sure in real life you get called names other than your first name. I know I do. I'm not always called Brandon. In fact, most of the time I'm called McNulty. That's what my friends have always called me. I've always been McNulty. In fact, I didn't even use my first name until I entered adulthood. So for the longest time, I was stuck with McNulty. Now, I also had a bunch of other nicknames, especially back when I worked at a grocery store. All the different managers would have different names for me. One guy called me Brandonator, another guy called me B, another guy called me Brasden. There were all kinds of wacky names back then. But the important thing to remember is that different people in your life will refer to you with different names. Same goes for your characters. So if you have a character in your story, maybe somebody calls them by their first name, maybe somebody else calls them by their last name or their middle name or a nickname or so on and so on. Always consider these things because these, especially the nicknames, will show the level of familiarity between your characters. If someone gives you a nickname, it's probably somebody who is familiar with you and comfortable with you, as opposed to somebody who refers to you as your formal name, your first name, or Mr. McNulty or something like that. My 4th and final tip, choose character names that have meaning or tie into the themes of your story. A great example of this would be in Star Wars. The main character, his name is Luke Skywalker. Luke means light. His main opponent is Darth Vader. Darth translates to dark. Light versus dark. That's one of the main themes of Star Wars, and they illustrate it right off the bat through the character names. Another great example of this would be in the Bourne Identity. The main character, his name is Jason Bourne. The name Bourne hints at the fact that he is born again because he has amnesia, and he has to define himself and who he will be in the future. So when you're coming up with your character names, try to choose names that inject meaning into your story. Sometimes you can choose names that are on the nose, like Jason Bourne. He's born again. He needs to find his new identity. Other times you can pick pick more nuanced examples. For instance, you can actually go on Google and type in names that mean strength. And if you're writing a book about a character who needs to become stronger or needs to find their inner strength, you can pick and choose from the names you find on Google and just plug them into your story. Some readers are crazy about that. They really love to dig deep into what each name means. Others won't care. So just keep that in mind. It could go either way with the readers, but I think in general you want to pick names that fit your characters and fit the story and help illustrate what your story world is about. So always think about these types of things when you are naming your characters. So I hope this helps. Question of the day: what is your main character's name and what does that name say about them? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to check out my other videos. Hit the like and subscribe buttons for me. Share this video with a friend. Pick up a copy of Bad Parts if you haven't already. And as always, remember to keep on writing.